week, Idaho County Sheriff's deputies and the coroner investigated remains found in that area. A hunter initially made the discovery and notified authorities. Officials say bones and a human skull were recovered.
In the fall of 2010, Todd Hofflander, an experienced outdoorsman with years of backcountry survival under his belt, set off for what should have been a routine hunting trip. The destination? The rugged, wild terrain of Idaho's Sawtooth wilderness. He wasn't going in blind. This was familiar ground, and he wasn't going in alone. His friend Jeff and his loyal black Labrador Ruby were by his side. Todd wasn't new to this. He'd prepared meticulously. A .357 Magnum revolver, camping supplies, and enough food to last for days were carefully packed into his gear. The plan was simple: a 4-day trek into Seven Devils Mountain, a steep and remote area ideal for hunting blacktail deer. Surrounded by the breathtaking cliffs of Hell's Canyon, the deepest gorge in North America, the goal was as much about the adventure as it was about the hunt. But things didn't go as planned. By the third day, Todd started experiencing severe knee pain. The pain slowed their pace, and for the first time, doubt crept in. Could they finish the trip safely? Trying to salvage what was left of their plan, Jeff suggested Todd stay behind to rest while he continued forward to complete the route. Jeff even called his father Steve to join them later, agreeing to return for Todd once the hike was finished. It sounded safe. Todd would rest, recover, and regroup with them later.
Well, as millions head to U.S. national parks this summer, we are shedding light on a little-known list called the List of the Missing. The National Park Service has faithfully kept records of visitors who are gone, often without a trace.
But when Jeff and Steve returned to the spot where they left him, Todd was gone. The disappearance. No tracks, no notes, no signs of struggle, just gone. What should have been a temporary delay transformed into the beginning of a haunting decade-long mystery. Search teams were immediately deployed. Helicopters buzzed through the skies. Search dogs scoured the forest floor. Authorities and volunteers covered every possible path Todd could have taken. They searched cliffs, thickets, and the deepest valleys of the Sawtooth terrain. But no trace of him emerged. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. As days turned into weeks, suspicions surfaced, and one name came up again and again: Jeff. The sheriff's office called Jeff in for questioning. He was, after all, the last person to see Todd. He agreed to a polygraph test, but the results didn't help. His answers were inconsistent, and he failed. Immediately, speculation swirled. Some thought Jeff was hiding something. Others suspected the polygraph meant little, and that the harsh wilderness was simply to blame. Jeff's father, Steve, stood by him, outraged that the investigation was turning against them instead of continuing the search. Then the focus shifted to Todd's wife, Julie. She described Jeff in a different light.
We begin tonight with news out of Idaho County. Remains of a man who went missing in the Riggins area 10 years ago have been found. In September of 2010, Todd Hofflander was reported missing. One of his last known locations was in the area of Bernard Creek.
Hot-headed, unreliable, sometimes even aggressive. She claimed he often belittled Todd, made inappropriate comments, and had a reputation for breaking promises. That image painted Jeff not just as a troubled friend, but as someone whose behavior was now under intense scrutiny. But evidence was still missing, until something strange happened. The dog returns. Months later, a couple hiking near the mountains called the sheriff's office. They had found a lone black Labrador wandering the wilderness, weak, confused, but alive. It was Ruby, Todd's dog. When the family saw her, they confirmed it instantly, but something was off. Ruby's collar and dog pack were missing. It was as though someone, or something, had deliberately removed them. How had she survived alone for days in a wilderness home to cougars, bears, and wolves? She was dehydrated but remarkably healthy. For a domestic pet raised indoors, this didn't add up. Hope ignited again. If Ruby made it out alive, maybe Todd was still out there, injured but surviving. Authorities returned to the mountains, using Ruby as a guide. They hoped she'd lead them back to her owner. Instead, she led them to something far stranger. The moment Ruby's paws touched the forest floor, her behavior shifted. Her tail dropped. Her body trembled. She refused to walk. She barked into the trees, whimpering, then froze, as if she sensed something not right. She didn't want to go forward. Whatever memory lived in that forest had left a mark on her, and it was enough to unsettle even seasoned law enforcement. Still, the search continued. Teams were deployed again. Search dogs, helicopters, ground crews, sweeping the area near Bernard Creek. But nothing new turned up. Desperate for closure, Julie turned to something less conventional. She brought in Lynn May, a clairvoyant from California. Lynn described a tall man, a violent death, and a shallow grave near the base of a mountain. Skeptical but willing to try anything, authorities followed the lead. 7 search teams were dispatched. They combed the mountain base for days. By late October 2010, the official investigation was exhausted. No new clues, no credible leads. Just theories, speculation, and heartbreak. The search was called off. Authorities closed the case, classifying Todd Hofflander's disappearance as unsolved. For his family, the lack of closure was unbearable. For Jeff, the weight of suspicion never fully lifted. And for the online world, Todd's vanishing became another strange and tragic entry into the growing list of people who disappear without a trace in U.S. national parks. Years passed, people moved on, but the mountains didn't forget. A hunter's discovery. Then, in April 2020, nearly 10 years to the day, fate finally broke its silence. A hunter, venturing deep into the Bernard River mouth, came across something horrifying. Among a patch of overgrown brush lay a scattering of human bones. Nearby, decaying remnants of gear, binoculars, a weather-beaten backpack, a partially buried camera. DNA testing later confirmed what Todd's family had feared all along. It was him. Todd Hofflander's remains had been found, right there in the area they had searched so many times before. The same area Ruby had feared to enter. But one thing was conspicuously absent. Todd's .357 Magnum revolver, gone. And the camera? Still intact enough for the memory card to be recovered. What it contained sent shivers down the spines of every investigator who saw it. The photo that changed everything. Most of the images were what you'd expect. Blurry shots of trees, terrain, hunting equipment, a few candid wilderness selfies, the usual markers of someone chronicling their trip. But then came the last image, grainy, out of focus, damaged by time, but unmistakable. There in the background, half hidden among the trees, a shape, a towering figure, broad, dark, humanoid, but off, wrong. Its proportions were all wrong. The shoulders too wide, the limbs too long, the silhouette too massive. Whatever it wasn't human. Was Bigfoot to blame? Forensic experts couldn't say much. The remains were too degraded. No official cause of death could be determined. The case was once again closed, labeled an accidental disappearance. But that photo, combined with the strange survival of Ruby, the missing gun, and the chilling behavior of search animals, ignited a new wave of speculation. Had Todd encountered something no one was ready to believe? A decade of silence, a loyal dog that made it out alive, a memory card that refused to degrade, a shadow in the woods. Locals began whispering again about strange sightings in the Sawtooth range, about a creature that moved through trees but left no trail, about a towering beast with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The missing revolver. Of all the strange pieces surrounding Todd Hofflander's disappearance, one detail stands out like a red flag waving through the trees: the absence of his revolver. This wasn't just any piece of equipment. It was a .357 Magnum, chosen deliberately by a man who knew the dangers of the wild. For Todd, that revolver was more than a weapon. It was survival insurance, a lifeline, protection against predators, human or animal. And yet, when his belongings were found years later, weathered by time and tangled in underbrush, the revolver was missing. It hadn't been damaged or dropped nearby. It wasn't tucked into his backpack or hidden under debris. It was simply gone. Did he use it? Did he lose it? Or did someone or something take it? That question continues to disturb anyone familiar with the case, because for a seasoned outdoorsman like Todd, losing his sidearm wasn't just careless, it was unthinkable. But even stranger is the decision Todd made before he vanished. With a painful knee injury slowing him down, staying put seemed like the only rational option. He had food, water, shelter. He was in contact with Jeff, who had promised to return with help. Every survival manual, every piece of training Todd had ever relied on, would have told him the same thing: wait. And yet, when Jeff and his father returned to that exact spot, Todd was no longer there. It's a decision that defies logic. Why would someone in pain, in a remote wilderness, choose to leave their only known lifeline? Had something frightened him enough to make him abandon the plan? Had he seen something, heard something, or believed he saw help somewhere deeper in the woods? The possibilities are chilling. Was he lured away by hope or chased off by fear? Then came the final, puzzling revelation. Todd's remains were eventually discovered near the mouth of the Bernard River, dozens of miles from where he had last been seen. For a healthy man, it would have been a brutal hike. But for someone limping through rugged terrain with a knee injury, it should have been impossible. How did he get there? Did he push through pain and exhaustion, driven by desperation? Or was his body moved by someone else, by something else? The landscape he would have had to cross wasn't forgiving. Steep slopes, sharp rock, thick forest, all of it unforgiving to even the most skilled hikers. And yet, somehow, he or his remains ended up in a location no one could explain. Even with the help of helicopters and expert tracking teams, his body had eluded discovery for a decade. Only a chance encounter by a hunter cracked the silence. The Portlock connection. As the mystery deepened, many began to wonder if Todd's story was an isolated case or if it echoed something older, something darker. Far to the northwest, in the icy wilderness of Alaska, a hauntingly similar story had already unfolded. A place once called Portlock, a peaceful village by the sea, until it wasn't. Portlock was abandoned, not once, not twice, but 4 times. Generations of people had tried to settle there, and generation after generation had fled in fear. Something drove them out, something no one could explain, but the stories, they remained. Whispers of a terrifying presence in the woods, of figures in the fog, of a creature too large, too fast, and too intelligent to be human. Some called it Bigfoot, others called it something worse, but whatever it was, it left death in its wake. Back in 1785, a British explorer named Nathaniel Portlock had first arrived and given the area its name. He had unknowingly marked the beginning of one of the most unsettling legacies in the American frontier. Every attempt to settle the area was met with illness, dread, and terror. Entire crews became overwhelmed with fear. Strong men broke down. Survivors whispered about the air feeling wrong, about cries echoing from the woods. Strange illnesses took hold. Fear poisoned the community from the inside out. By 1867, a brave group of Sugpiaq natives tried again. For a short time, it worked. The land was fertile. The fishing was good. Life returned. But then the attacks began. And this time, it wasn't illness. It was something far more primal. The Sugpiaq people described their attackers as giants, massive feral creatures that came not for war, not for livestock, but for people. These weren't wild animals. These were intelligent predators, hunting humans with terrifying efficiency. They came at night, they avoided traps, and they struck with purpose. Even more disturbing, the attacks seemed to follow a pattern. When the wildlife in the forest was abundant, the village was left alone. But when food became scarce, the giants returned. It wasn't random, it was calculated. Eventually, the village had no choice but to abandon Portlock once more, leaving behind stories of night raids, mutilated victims, and a forest that seemed to breathe with malevolence. Some scientists have suggested a possible explanation: infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can't be heard by the human ear, but can be felt. They can cause nausea, panic, and the sense of being watched. Tigers use it to freeze their prey. Whales use it to terrify rivals. Could something in the forests of Portlock, and maybe even Idaho, be using infrasound? Something that doesn't want to be seen, something that doesn't want to be followed, something that wants you to leave, or worse. By the 20th century, another group tried to defy the odds. Russian Alutic families moved in and built infrastructure: a post office, a cannery, a school. They enforced nightly curfews, they posted armed guards, and they avoided the forest on foggy days. But they couldn't avoid what came next. In 1931, a logger named Andrew Kamluck wandered deeper into the trees than he should have. What was found days later horrified everyone. His body was broken, his head crushed by his own sled. Nearby, his sled dogs were torn to shreds. The sled itself had been hurled far from the scene. No human could have done that, not alone. The people of Portlock understood the message, and just like before, they left. Connecting the dots. The similarities are impossible to ignore. Portlock, Bernard Creek, Todd Hofflander, remote areas, disappearances, strange behavior from animals, silent forests that seem to swallow people whole, and always, just out of reach, something in the trees. Was Portlock a unique anomaly, or was it simply the most famous example of something larger, something still out there, watching, waiting? The stories didn't die when the villages did. In fact, the legends of the towering beast, known in some native traditions as the Nantinak, and in others as Yawis, only spread further across generations. These creatures weren't just whispered about in the fog, they were embedded into the oral traditions of the native Sugpiaq people. Descriptions remained consistent: massive, upright beings covered in thick hair, with features that seemed somewhere between beast and man, and most disturbingly, intelligent. To those who had lived closest to the wilderness, the creature wasn't myth. It was a reality you didn't challenge. You respected the land, and you stayed indoors when the forest grew quiet. But when settlers began arriving in the late 1700s, even they began to report encounters. Hardened men, traders, fishermen, loggers, people not known for flights of fancy. Their stories mirrored those from the native tales. Glimpses of large bipedal shadows, eyes shining from the tree line, unexplained howls in the night that echoed through the valleys. These weren't hallucinations, they were testimonies, and they were piling up. A beachside encounter. Then came one of the most terrifying accounts. Tom Larson, a Portlock resident, had gone to the shoreline one morning to chop wood for fish traps. It was routine, something he had done countless times before. It should have been just another day on the edge of civilization. But that day, something changed. Out of the corner of his eye, Larson noticed a figure, something massive, standing upright near the water's edge. Covered in dark hair, with limbs too long and posture too fluid to be a bear, the creature simply stood there, watching. Larson turned fully toward it, his breath catching. The sheer size was overwhelming, but it wasn't just the size. It was the eyes, piercing, steady, intelligent. It wasn't observing him like prey, it was studying him. A primal fear surged through Larson's body. He dropped his axe and ran, not aimlessly, but straight home to retrieve his rifle. Whatever it was, he wasn't going to let it walk away without a fight. But when he returned, weapon in hand, the scene turned stranger still. The creature was still there, still watching, still calm. Larson raised his rifle, took aim, and froze. He couldn't move, couldn't fire, couldn't even breathe right. His hands didn't shake from fear. They simply stopped responding. His muscles refused to obey. It was as though something invisible had seized his entire body. The creature continued to look at him, not with rage, not with fear, but with understanding. Then, without a sound, it turned and slowly walked back into the forest, not running, not hiding, retreating, as if it knew Larson couldn't stop it even if he tried. Larson stood there for minutes, maybe more, silent, paralyzed, the rifle still in his hands. And when he finally lowered it, he didn't feel relief, only a deeper, more unsettling dread. Something had passed between them. Larson's encounter wasn't just a personal nightmare. It sent ripples through the entire town. The Nantinaq was no longer content with lurking in fog or dragging people off into the trees. It had made itself visible. It had come out of hiding. It had looked a man in the eyes and let him live. That realization frightened the townspeople more than any bloody scene or disappearing villager ever could, because it meant the creature was no longer operating in secrecy. It was making itself known, showing itself with purpose, testing the boundaries. It wasn't hiding, it was announcing. And Portlock knew the message. The stories passed down through native cultures, once dismissed as myth, now carried new weight. The settlers no longer scoffed. Fear gripped the town like a tightening fist. Families didn't let their children out after dark. The forests were no longer a place for gathering firewood or fishing. They were no longer just dangerous. They were forbidden. The Nantinaq was real, and it was getting bolder. Todd Hofflander's disappearance may have been ruled accidental, but nothing about it feels accidental. A seasoned outdoorsman vanishes without a trace. A dog survives the impossible. A weapon goes missing. And a final image, frozen in time, captures something that shouldn't exist. Then, hundreds of miles away, a long-abandoned Alaskan village echoes with stories that sound all too familiar. Portlock, like Bernard Creek, swallowed its people in silence, fear, and shadows. The same creature, the same legends, the same warning signs. Coincidence or connection? We may never know what truly happened to Todd in those mountains, but one thing is certain: the wilderness keeps its secrets well, and sometimes it keeps them forever.